We're going to go back in time.
Is this thing on? Yes, it is.
It is. Darren Dochterman, you know after this weekend, co-host of Inglorious Treksperts, concept designer for films like Knives Out 2, Glass Onion, Star Trek Picard, Westworld, and an excellent moderator of panels. Welcome, Darren Dochterman, back to the stage.
Thank you. And on my right, the wonderful and talented Mark A. Altman, showrunner for the CW's Pandora series, and author and co-author of many wonderful books about pop culture, Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, John Wick, et cetera, et cetera,
but
et cetera.
Today, I'm here in my capacity as the producer of a new documentary on the movies of 1982. 1982, Greatest Geek Year Ever. We just had the world premiere at the famous Sitges Festival in Spain to a sold-out audience. We're going to show some footage today. It'll be out sometime next year. Why 1982? Some of you may be thinking. What was so special about that year, other than the fact Duran Duran's Rio came out that year? Well, it was Joan Jett's I Love Rock and Roll. But and had we gotten here earlier, we would have played some 1982 music, but we didn't. But what an amazing year for film. Blade Runner, E.T., Tron, Conan the Barbarian, Poltergeist, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan,
Blade Runner,
Barry Bostwick's legendary Megaforce. Okay, well, not everything was amazing, but Sword and Sorcerer.
But there has never been a year where so many genre films, specifically, have been released in such a small amount of time.
John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yeah. It's just, the list is never ending. And it's quite amazing, even for people who weren't alive then, when they look at the list of all these, huge movies that are still known today, that it all came out then.
Yeah, and one of the things we wanted to find out for the documentary, why was this year so special and it could ever happen again? And so we talked to people like Ron Howard, whose first film came out that year, Night Shift. And it's great because he gave us his home movie. Henry Winkler actually gave us his home movies from Night Shift. So we have all this footage people have never seen before from the set of Night Shift. And everybody's so young. The Fonz look so young. Ron Howard looks still like Opie and not like the director of Willow. And it's really incredible. And other movies like the Citizen Kane of Teensploitation, Fast Times at Ridgemont High came out that year. Porky's came out that year. Friday the 13th Part 3D, which introduced the iconic hockey mask, came out in 1982. And does anybody know what the best picture of 1982 was? This is the year that E.T. came out. This is the year Star Trek II, Blade Runner, all these amazing movies. You know what won the Oscar that year? What? No, it was not Terms of Endearment. It's a good guess. It was not The Verdict. It was not Sophie's Choice. It was not any of these films we talked about. It was Gandhi.
Right.
Gandhi. So,
which you would have known if you would have gone to the Gandhi panel yesterday,
yeah.
Which was even less attended than this one.
Ben Kingsley is signing over in the other convention hall. So it was an incredible year for film, and in much the way that the filmmakers like Paul Schrader, who made Cat People that year, were influenced by the people that John Carpenter grew up on The Thing and then remakes The Thing. This was a film that inspired filmmakers for the next 40 years. They grew up on the movies of 1982, and it had an incredible impact on their lives. But for a lot of people here at the convention, even more so than E.T., even more so than Poltergeist, even more so than Blade Runner, there was a seminal film, and of course that was Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And we're going to show a little clip, an excerpt of the Star Trek II sequence right now, if we can, which is a clip from 1982. Greatest Geek Year Ever. And this is Nick Meyer and a few other guests talking about the genius of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan.
Some say the world will end by fire.
Uh-oh.
Others say it will end by ice.
This is The Thing, but it's also from the documentary. So we're going to watch The Thing now.
The question is being settled forever. John Carpenter's The Thing.
We were making a big move. This was a studio movie. This was not an independent film movie where John and myself included had control over what we were going to do. This is the first of when we started to feel a little bit of pressure.
The production that they did up in British Columbia, it almost killed everybody. It was really the toughest shoot ever.
Exterior of the camp was right on the edge of the glacier, so we built the camp there, all the exterior stuff.
There's that element of paranoia in the first film, The Thing from Outer Space, using metaphors for a Cold War sense of endangerment.
I bring you a warning. Every one of you listening to my voice, tell the world, tell this to everybody wherever they are. Watch the skies.
These men were afraid of each other, thinking this guy might be infected and he might take me over, absorb me, and turn me into one of those things.
Somebody in this camp ain't what he appears to be. Right now, that may be one or two of us. By spring, it could be all of us.
Now, we wear masks, and I don't want you to get too close to me, because you might be infected.
The Thing, because of the premise, is far more resonant today than it was then.
I don't know who to trust. Trust's a tough thing to come by these days.
People are responding to this idea that there is an invisible, hidden menace that could get any of us.
Nobody trusts anybody now.
And my fellow human beings, one of them or two of them or all of them could infect me. I give John Carpenter a lot of credit for having some mix, some cultural, ethnic, racial mix in that film in 1982.
There weren't a lot of characters as a geek or black geek to get excited about. All of a sudden, in 1982, we've got The Thing, T.K. Carter.
Maybe we had war with Norway.
With Keith David, his first movie role, incredible.
I went from Midsummer Night's Dream to my speech teacher training. Good American speech for the theater. And then when I got the script, I was like, oh my goodness, I hope that I can, drop this training long enough so I'm not saying, you motherfucker, Because, I had all those classic, wonderful lines.
Now, how's this motherfucker wake up after thousands of years in the ice?
Do you believe any of this voodoo bullshit, And
I just cannot believe any of this voodoo bullshit.
One thing that is still distinctive to this day, the special effects on The Thing was not CGI. Today, you look at that stuff and you go, really? Wow. Fabulous.
Possibly the best. Practical special effects because of Rob Bottin, who designed the way the characters transformed into the monsters. It was masterful.
There was a lot of yin and yang going on finishing the effects. There were a lot of things that happened during photography which we'd have to say, no, we're going to figure that out in editorial and we need an insert of this or we need an insert of that. So we carried a lot of stuff into post-production.
When they shot the film, most of the Rob Bottin stuff did not happen on set. There's no way you could ever do that again. There's no way you could ever get permission for an artist to try to figure out the most important visual element of your movie after you've already shot your film. There's never been anything like it.
So the splitting head, they had prepared this for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and of course it didn't work the first time. It was all screwed up. So now we're gonna stay there all night. And we started at, I don't know, like 2 o'clock in the afternoon or something like this, and we just kept working around the clock.
Palmer is transformed into the monster. Kurt Russell finally gets the flamethrower working, ignites this monster, and that was a real burn. Tony Caesar, stuntman, that was his specialty.
They had to do it twice. On camera, you could see that the split head was a mask, and he had another black mask. John was like, well, we have to do it again. So he did it again. They lit this cat up. I was standing in the catwalk. I was 30 feet up there, and the flame was in my face. I could feel the heat. They weren't going to get it wrong a second time.
John Carpenter's The Thing changed the world in how stories were told, a downbeat ending that wasn't popular before those days.
You the only one who made it?
Not the only one.
Did you kill it?
Where were you, Charles?
Not only is it downbeat, but we don't even know the conclusion of that story.
Why don't we just wait here for a little while? See what happens.
John and I had gone on vacation when he finished the film. And when we came back, we landed in Miami, and E.T. was on the cover of one of the national magazines. And John looked at it and he said, well, that's it for the thing.
It was such a gut shot when E.T. came out and we came out, and it was like, okay, here's what can really be great about people coming in from outer space, and here's what can really be shitty.
Clear.
We just got completely blown off.
Everybody thought The Thing was going to be a smash, and it turned out that The Thing was not successful at all at the box office.
If it had come out in October or November, it would have immediately had another kind of credibility. I don't know what the marketing guy got for marketing our movie, but he should have got life. It was such a bad marketing idea.
The next film, The Thing, has already caused a lot of talk before it has opened. About 2 weeks ago, something very unusual happened to me. I began getting postcards at my newspaper office from readers telling me that John Carpenter's new movie, I guess they'd seen it in a preview, was one of the most disgusting films ever made. Well, those postcard writers certainly were right about one thing.
I also remember critics talking about, oh, it's so horrible. You can't take your kids. Don't take your kids. It's a horror movie. What a stupid thing to say.
I would call this the barf bag movie of July. The story is totally implausible, and the movie just basically is an excuse for this very gruesome and repellent creature to gross us out. It is the most nauseating thing I've ever seen on a movie screen.
Horror can be used to hold up a mirror to society.
Everybody watch whoever you're with. Real close.
Horror can be used to hit on deep, meaningful themes.
I think that it's about how a society, this little group here, wants to poison, they think something's going wrong. You're not in the group, you're out. Move, just that line, move away to one side. It's a very chilling thing. And I think if you read the movie in that way, then the implausibilities at your level mean very little.
99% of the people who go to see this movie are there to see the monsters, and very few of them are going to read it as your kind of allegory of McCarthyism.
That we will see.
The critics at the time just didn't get it. They didn't understand what Carpenter was trying to do.
It is a brutal shame because it derailed John Carpenter's career.
We were just gutted when The Thing didn't perform, and then especially gutted when they took the next movie away because it didn't perform, and of course John was taking the heat for that. That was totally unfair.
John Carpenter talks about the fact that he was depressed about what happened with The Thing for 14 years. He was in pain because his best work hadn't been appreciated at the time it came out.
God, we'll keep it running. I'm going to talk over it. But it's such an interesting look at The Thing. We didn't even mention some of the other movies like Rocky III, First Blood, 48 Hours. I mean, the list goes on and on of the films that came out in 1982. It's an extraordinary year for motion picture. I'm sure some of you have your favorites, but certainly I think this is at the top or near the top of many people's lists here at GalaxyCon, and that's Star Trek II.
That year was the second week of June. All of a sudden, there are two Steven Spielberg movies coming out within a week of each other. And the first one that came out was Poltergeist.
Poltergeist.
Okay, we're not going to do this because this is Poltergeist. You're going to have to see the film.
Scares built in.
This is all on me, by the way. I got nobody else to blame but me. Never have the producer put this stuff together.
Using the child.
Okay, so we're gonna stop the video. But if you want a real treat, we'll show you the Megaforce one before we leave here, because that's a treat. So if we can tee up the Megaforce, and I'll cue you on that, because in honor of Barry Bostwick, it's only appropriate. Plus, you can all go to his booth and tell him that you saw it, because he's wonderful in it. I have to say, just before we show that is not color timed, and it's not the mixed version, but it is. You'll get a sense of it. Darren, what's your favorite film in 1982?
You know, it's tough because I do love Star Trek II, but I also really love E.T. and I love Blade Runner, and I love so many. That's the tough part about it, is you can't really pick your favorite because they're all your favorites.
Why do you think there was this creative ferment that year that you don't see in current movies as much?
I think it has to do with the reaction to the success of Star Wars and Close Encounters. because I think it sort of took Hollywood a few years to catch up with how to do these kinds of films and have them do them successfully. Of course, immediately after Star Wars and Close Encounters, there were a bunch of knockoff films that weren't exactly as successful, but they were trying to do the same thing. But I think it took sort of both established filmmakers and new filmmakers to sort of get the idea of what their own contribution to this genre should be. And it took a few years to happen, and I think '82 was the nexus of all this occurring.
And visual effects technology had finally come of age, because even if you look at something like Battlestar Galactica, they had to hire John Dykstra and the team that did Star Wars, because nobody else could do this. Star Trek: The Motion Picture, it's Doug Trumbull who did 2001, and Dykstra, because there was no one else who could do it. By '82, ILM is now working on other people's films. They're more visual effects houses.
Well, yeah, Star Trek was the first out-of-family project that ILM worked on. Of course, they'd done stuff for Spielberg before, on E.T. and Poltergeist. But Trek was the first one that was actually brought in by other sources than George's friends. So it was, obviously ILM had grown tremendously since '77, and the technology had advanced a little bit. They'd certainly pushed it for 1980s The Empire Strikes Back. But it was, by this time, the demand for big effects in movies and the audience desire for that was enough to establish a bunch of other companies starting up in that time.
Yeah, I want to, we talk at length about our favorite movies of 1982 on our other podcast, if you haven't heard, the 430 movie, in which we create fantasy theme weeks. And in our season finale for the 4th season, we did the 1982 movie week. And we spent about 2.5 hours talking about the films of 1982. I'd love to hear what your favorite films are of 1982 are, or maybe your least favorite films. But before we do that, let's take a look at Barry Bostwick in Megaforce, the anti-classic from 1982. And if you haven't seen this movie, you owe it to yourself to check out Megaforce. I can hear it, but I can't see it.
Are you man enough for Megaforce?
It's not showing on the screen.
We're seeing the stage cam now. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
There it is. Thank you. And you'll see Barry's a good sport about this.
Are you man enough for Megaforce? The audience basically was 12-year-old boys. The 12-year-old boy would be brought to the theater by their dad, and they would bond over this movie. Then they would go home, and then they would put rockets on their Schwinn bikes and do everything to make it look like a Megaforce motorcycle. It was so simple. It was good guys against the bad guys. It was black and white.
Leaders of every free nation in the world secretly contribute their best men and their most advanced equipment, and they determine where and when we strike.
I remember Megaforce had this great ad that every Marvel comic published around that time. They had, deeds not words, Barry Bostwick's character. It wasn't a photograph. It was a comic book style recreation, so you really did feel like, oh my God, this movie's like a comic book come to life. And, 12-year-old boy, there's nothing cooler than that.
The hardest part of making Megaforce was the thought that I could be killed at any moment by a vehicle which would go out of control, or a rocket which would basically go 20 feet, turn around, and go right through my chest.
We have a little problem here.
Those rockets, you lit them, and they just took off, and you didn't know where they were going to go. They go off, and then they just spiral all over the place. They were like boys playing with fireworks.
That's the way it is.
I was stoned by the pool, and they came and they said, no, you'll have to shoot this afternoon. And I go, well, I thought I was off for the day, or else I wouldn't have gotten, stoned by the pool in Las Vegas. And then I would be rushed to the set and hope that they didn't put me on a motorcycle that day. There was never any question that all the hardware and all the stunts wouldn't dominate the film. What was not thought through, I think, was the actual lines that came out of our mouths. A lot of these lines were made up on the spot.
The good guys always win, even in the 80s.
I'm going to take credit for everything that's funny in the movie, and I'm not going to take credit for all the crap.
Megaforce, you could joke around, but like everything in there's no CGI. That's all real. Everything was practical. A lot of money and time went into building all the vehicles. This is Michael Bay level of stuff, you know, before Michael Bay.
I'm proud of what it is, but my work in it is just terrible.
I have an apology to make.
The good guys always win, even in the 80s. That acting was as bad as my acting in the movie.
So there you go, a little taste of 1982 Greatest Geek Year Ever, which I hope you'll seek out next year. And if not, at least go see Megaforce. Because it's, everyone should see it once in their life. So let's ask you guys, favorite movies of 1982 or memories of 1982. Yep. Dark Crystal, great pick. And obviously we featured heavily in the movie. It was a great year for fantasy. Conan, Dark Crystal, Sword and Sorcerer, and The Beastmaster. And you may remember HBO, it stands for Hey, Beastmaster's on. So we go into a lot of great details about the Beastmaster as well. But yeah, Dark Crystal, what a special film from Jim Henson. So other favorites of 1982? You mentioned E.T.
E.T., of
obviously. I'd have to say, you know, just so many. I mean, obviously Star Trek II, and then you know Paul Newman in The Verdict is extraordinary in that film.
Absolutely,
not a great genre film, but.
But the funny thing is, as we talk about these movies that have become classics, most of them didn't do very well at the box office.
That's true.
So I think while the production was at the level that it should have been, I think the audience wasn't ready for it yet, or they just didn't know about it. And it's only now that we're realizing that most of these movies are classics and
like Megaforce,
like certain movies, but that we look back on them fondly.
Yeah.
But you know, where were we in 1982? Why didn't we buy more tickets? Why didn't we help them make big box office?
E.T. became the biggest grossing movie of all time. Poltergeist was very successful. Star Trek II was obviously very successful. Highest grossing 3-day weekend, two-day non-holiday weekend in history at that point. So there were definitely successes. Tootsie was hugely successful. 48 Hours opened against The Toy with Richard Pryor. That was a huge bomb, but 48 Hours was immensely successful, and it launched Eddie Murphy to superstardom.
Right.
So, but you're right. I mean, The Thing, Blade Runner, so many of these films that didn't work at the box office, we look back at now and say, you know, remarkable films, some of the best of all time.
Absolutely. Sorry, didn't hear you. That's true. Yeah. Especially in those days when they had just started to establish the multiplex cinemas and compensate for that problem of being too crowded in the weekend. But I think Hollywood soon figured out how to manage that and how to get the most out of their first weekend bucks.
Well, it's interesting because Star Trek II opened the same weekend as Poltergeist. They both did very well. Then, a couple of weeks later, you have Blade Runner, The Thing, and Megaforce all open on the same day. And you know what was the most successful that weekend? Megaforce. Go figure. Yeah. It's not the one that stood the test of time, sorry, in the way that Blade Runner and The Thing have, but that did better at the box office that weekend, even though it went on and was not a big success. Then a couple of weeks later, a movie we haven't talked about, Tron.
Right.
You know, which again did not do well at the box office and is now considered a classic and has spawned an animated series and a sequel and now a big theme park attraction that's opening at Disney World. So. Right. it's pretty amazing.
Look, the thing is that a lot of us remember this time as teenagers or even younger, and we didn't necessarily have control over the movies that we were allowed to go see. So I think that part of the resurgence of the fond memories of this are sort of trying to help out our younger selves enjoy things that we might have missed at the time. So I think that could have something to do with the fact that we think about this time period so fondly.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, Conan, for instance, is a movie that now would probably not, be made the way it was then. That was an R-rated movie. I mean, they were true to the Frazetta drawings and the Robert E. Howard. It's very, it's R-rated.
It's way more gory than The Thing.
It's way more gory than The Thing. There's a lot more blood. And, Dino De Laurentiis, basically said, well, if this had been PG, maybe it would have made more money. Then he tries to do that with Conan the Destroyer, and it's even less successful.
Yeah.
Because the thing is that, Albert Pion, who just died, did The Sword and the Sorcerer for under $1 million. That made almost as much money as Conan, and so, that was also when you could have, on the drive-in circuit, these small indies. Another movie that came out that year was Forbidden World, which was a Roger Corman film, and that was released in drive-ins and also very successful. Another in a long line of Alien ripoffs that had followed, Galaxy of Terror, and then they did Forbidden World. So it's very interesting, and one of the biggest movies of the year. Now it doesn't resonate in pop culture the way it did then, but Porky's was huge and spawned 2 sequels, Porky's 2 and the next day and Porky's Revenge. And, we don't think much about Porky's anymore, but that one sheet of the guys looking through the peephole in the gym class, it launched that movie. And it was an enormous success. Whereas Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which is unquestionably the better film, a lot of people don't know as well. And it was the beginning of Amy Heckerling and Cameron Crowe's career. And, it's a really great film. So I think that's really actually, this is a short one. This is
my goodness.
Yeah. So, but if you want to talk more about 1982, we'll be at our booth.
We'll be at our booth, and come on by and say hi.
And you can listen to 430 Movie for more on 1982 and 1982 movies on Twitter and 1982 Movie on Instagram as well. And Darren Dochterman, Mark A. Altman on Twitter and Instagram.
So thanks for coming. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for being at GalaxyCon.
Appreciate it.